thank you for hosting me today, and thank you all for joining us. I'm excited to walk you through this presentation. If you would like a copy of this slideshow, you can download it in PDF, ODP, or PPTX formats over at TG-ID.ca/download. So first of all, I'm Dana Teagle, and I'm a designer, web developer, and trans woman based in Toronto. So I've led workshops on name and gender marker changes for over 4 years, and I now run an online resource called TG-ID, which collects information on how to update legal names, gender markers, and identity documents in Ontario. In my opinion, the level of bureaucracy currently in place across the country for these vital services and processes makes them fundamentally inaccessible. It's very clear to me that none of them were built by marginalized people or even with us in mind, but I believe the communities coming together to share our experiences and resources with one another is an act of resistance, and that mentality is embedded in the way that I approach this work. I believe in the importance of trans people helping trans people with trans-related issues whenever possible. The TG-ID website is still a work in progress that I maintain in my spare time, but I'm hoping it can help break down some of these access barriers that prevent people from filing this paperwork. I will also give a brief demonstration of how to use it at the end of this presentation. So now in this presentation, I will give an overview of Ontario legal name changes, requests for Ontario birth registrations and certificates, sex designation changes on Ontario driver's license and photo cards, Ontario health card updates, passport updates, and updates to the SIN registry and the CRA. I will also point to resources I recommend for commissioning and notarizing and other trans-led resources that offer information and assistance for maintenance. So first of all, to change your name, you need to fill out an application called the Ontario Application to Change an Adult's Name. This is based on the 2024 edition of the application. So I always point out that these documents change very suddenly and without much notice. So always make sure you're filling out the most recent version of any given document. The application itself is 19 pages long and divided into 7 parts, but you may not need to fill out all of them. You must also submit a fee of $137 with your application. Now, I like to state the information that they require you to disclose because it can be a lot of your personal information, and that can actually take, a good amount of time to collect together. So that information is going to include your full current legal name, your new chosen name, your mailing address, your date and location of birth, your marital and relationship status, parental information, details of any previous name change, as well as information about any current or past criminal offenses, as well as information about any current or past financial judgments, fines, or bankruptcy. The additional sections in documentation also include if you're married or you're in what's called a joint conjugal relationship, which you'll generally know because you will have signed a document that's called the Joint Declaration of Conjugal Relationship. You are required to notify your partner or spouse about your name change, and you'll need to complete part 2 of the application. If you're 16 or 17 and changing your own name, you will require the consent of every individual who holds legal custody over you and must complete part 3. If you have any outstanding law enforcement orders against you, have ever been convicted of a criminal offense, or have any pending criminal charges against you, you will need a police record check as part of your application. Though I say make sure to download the requirements for a police record check for a change of name form to ensure that the police force conducting the check performs one that meets all the specific requirements, because the last thing that you want is to go through all of the process of contacting the police department and having that conversation with them and then do it in a way that is going to actually further delay you in filing this application. And also, I think a really important thing to note is that a lot of people that go through this process often assume that everyone needs a police check, but it is actually only if you have outstanding law enforcement orders against you or have been convicted of something in the past. So the majority of people who are going through this process actually don't need to. And I know many people who go through the time and the energy and spend the money who it wasn't even necessary to begin with. Again, another example of how this whole process is, very overcomplicated. And then another important thing is that if you were born in a different part of Canada and you want a new birth certificate, you will have to contact the province or territory where you were born after you receive your change of name certificate. Now, the guarantor statement. So you will also require a guarantor who can prove that any of your permanent addresses have been located in Ontario for the last 12 months prior to your application. In my experience, most applicants will use a medical professional for this category. However, there are several other options, such as municipal clerks, school principals, and First Nation chiefs. For the full list, you can check page 13 of the application. But if you cannot find anyone who meets the requirements, you can also use someone other than a relative who has known you for at least 5 years and can speak to your residency in Ontario for the past year. So I always say, like, make sure that you remove the guarantor statement section and have the chosen individual complete and return it to you before you submit your application. Often, even all of the steps involved here that involve other people, you should get ahead of and try and prepare for. I'll have sort of a checklist of my suggested order at the end of the name changes, though. Now, in terms of also your previous identity documents and any additional requirements, if you were born in Ontario and you have a valid birth certificate, you must include the originals or certified copies of all previously issued short or long form certificates with your application. Now, for some people, this can be really difficult because often a birth certificate will be held by your parents, and if you don't have a relationship with your parents or you are out of touch with them, those can be difficult to acquire. So an important thing to note is that similar to if you do not have a birth certificate, you will likely need to apply for a new one before you can submit that application. In all likelihood, that should be enough. But yeah, on the off chance that you're contested for that, there is the chance that you will need to get an affidavit to provide with that birth certificate, just to state that that's the only one that you have the copy of. And then again, yeah, if you were born outside of Ontario but within Canada, you can submit either an original birth certificate or a certified copy issued by that province. And then also, if all or a part of a document sent in support of your name change is not written in English or French, you will have to send an English or French translation. If this is the case for you, there are the requirements for a translator on page 13. Now, a really important form that a lot of people actually don't know about is the request for non-publication. So all name changes in Ontario are published in the Ontario Gazette. However, you can request non-publication specifically for the cases of if you are transgender, First Nations, Inuit, or Métis by submitting a completed request for non-publication form with your change of name application. Because yeah, they currently publish information in both paper and online. So I know for a lot of people, publication of your previous name alongside your new one is not desirable. So I generally strongly recommend adding this into your process. And then commissioning. Commissioning is something that a lot of people, I think, don't always know what it means or get confused about the idea. So you must sign the statutory declaration on page 16 in front of a commissioner for taking affidavits, who will seal or stamp the document at that time to verify your identity and the accuracy of the information as written. The commissioner does not have to know the person signing the application. And some people will often, think that it's a notary as opposed to a commissioner. They're often the same person. While they are different qualifications, most notaries will also be commissioners. And yeah, so a lot of notary and commissioners' offices in Ontario will actually commission these documents for trans individuals for no charge. However, if there is a charge, the typical one is about $35 to $40. So for individuals, I don't know of any specific ones that cover them out this way, but I know that there are several back toward like Aurora, Barrie, Mississauga, Toronto. There's a company called Downtown Notary that will do it for free. Yeah.
Yeah, I think most of the MPPs and MPs will do it for free.
They will? Okay.
Yeah, I think I got mine done through Brian Massey.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I know that, yeah, several, have done commissioning for trans people at no charge in the past, but again, I always suggest confirming that before you schedule your appointment. And then when it comes to submitting the application, if possible, I recommend sending the entire application in a tracked envelope using Canada Post to ease the stress of the application getting lost in the mail. Particularly because, I mean, this is the thing, like you have this timeline in your head of like 6 to 8 weeks for this application, but that's 6 to 8 weeks that is going to start once it arrives. And as the postal service is increasingly unreliable, I'd say in recent years, I find it really important to have that date that you know it arrived, which you're only going to get by sending it tracked. Um, and then, yeah, you will send your completed form, payment, and required documents to the Office of the Registrar General in Thunder Bay, Ontario. If it's more accessible for you to submit the application in person, though, I think the only place that they allow you to do it is in Toronto. So generally not accessible for the majority of Ontario. Um, and then, yeah, if your application is complete and accurate, you should receive a certificate of name change, which looks like this, in about 6 to 8 weeks. However, it may take longer if you have requested a change to a single name or reclaimed name. And then if you were born in Ontario, you will also receive your updated birth certificate at that time. But if you were born elsewhere in Canada, notice of your name change is generally sent to the Vital Statistics Office in the province or territory where you were born, and you will most likely need to apply to that office to obtain a new birth certificate. And just a couple of other suggestions. So when filling out these forms, I always say make sure to give yourself time. It will likely take several weeks to gather all the information you need and to complete, double check, and submit the forms. Additionally, it's important to ensure you print clearly using a pen with blue or black ink. You are not allowed to use correction fluid on any forms. And if you make a mistake or you want to change information, you must do the following process, which is put brackets around the wrong information, enter the correct information, put your initials beside each change, and then have the commissioner initial each change before it is sworn. I will say though, generally I recommend just like printing out multiple copies of the application and doing a test run because you don't want to give them a reason to send it back. And I feel like having any information that is wrong, even if you are following the procedure of correcting it, could cause further complications. So your change of name certificate will show your previous name and your new name, and you can use that certificate to change your name on other personal documents, such as driver's licenses, photos cards, or health cards, as I will explain. So this is sort of my checklist of what I believe is the best order to do this in. So you sort of fill out the application to change an adult's name, all relevant sections, excluding guarantor statement, and the request for non-publication, but you do not sign anything. You collect all the required identification photocopies and or original documents, including translations if necessary. You receive consent from every person who has legal custody of you, if applicable. You give your partner or spouse notice that you are changing your name if applicable. You receive a police check if necessary. And then you also secure the $137 plus shipping to submit the application. At that time, you then secure a guarantor and have them fill out the guarantor statement. That's also something that, as I said, if you separate that part of the application, you can have that done while you're working on everything else. You make an appointment with a commissioner, having them witness you sign and then commission the document. And then you're going to mail the document to the Office of the Registrar General in Thunder Bay or submit in person in Toronto. So now when it comes to birth registrations and certificates, to update the sex designation on your Ontario birth registration or certificate, you need to complete the Ontario application for change of sex designation on birth registration of an adult. Every single name of all of these forms is a mouthful, as well as the statutory declaration for a change of sex designation on a birth registration of an adult. Again, this one's based on the 2022 edition of the application, so as with the name change application, always make sure you're filling out the most recent version of any given document. The application is 2 pages long, and the declaration is a single page, and they can be submitted at the same time as your Ontario name change, if applicable. And I'd say generally that this, is going to be the best process because you're sending them to the same place. If you were born in Ontario, you're going to be receiving a birth certificate at the end of it, and you're just going to be going through that process multiple times if you try and do them as 2 separate processes. Now, when changing your sex designation, you have the options of M for male, F for female, or X, representing gender neutral, or not to display the sex designation field at all. Depending on your chosen designation, your process will be different. You must be born in Ontario and 16 years of age or older to complete this application. And along with the forms, you must provide a letter from a licensed doctor or psychologist in good standing, written on that doctor's letterhead, stating that the doctor has examined or treated you, and they can attest that the updated designation is appropriate and signed by the doctor. All previously issued short and long form birth certificates and certified copies of your birth registration, and then also the completed application form and declaration, along with any applicable fees, which I will get to. Now, just like the name change application, you must sign the statutory declaration of the application in front of a commissioner for taking affidavits. So please factor that into your plan as you begin to work through your documents. It makes most sense to complete both applications at the same time if you're already going through this process. And then in terms of submitting your application, so while there used to be a fee for changing your sex designation, Service Ontario began waiving the fee back in 2021. They have continued to periodically extend the window for free applications and currently do not list a fee. However, please make sure to double check this policy is still in standing at the time of submission because, as I say, they often change things very suddenly and without much notice. There may also be fees applicable for copies of short or long form birth certificates or registrations, again, unless submitting at the same time as an Ontario name change, because it'll be included in that fee, because they already have to send you one as part of that $157. So that's part of why also you might as well submit this one at the same time, and you don't have to pay an extra fee for that document. And then same as the name change, so you send your completed form, payment, and required documents to the Office of the Registrar General in Thunder Bay, Ontario. If mailing at the same time as a name change, you can mail all documents together in one envelope to the address listed under that section. And if being filed without a name change, I recommend a tracked envelope as with that application. Photocopied, faxed, e-signed documents, none of them will be accepted, unfortunately. Now, some important considerations for this one. So, birth certificates with a sex designation of X or no sex displayed are recognized by the Government of Ontario, who claim they do not endorse any rejection of valid Ontario birth certificates by any official body. However, unfortunately, they also claim they cannot guarantee that these documents will be accepted by organizations in Ontario or in other jurisdictions. This is a thing that comes up a couple more times in my presentation, but I will say it's something that a lot of non-binary trans people are increasingly having to deal with because, particularly with like the political situation in the US, for instance, there are many ways in which having a sex designation of X actually results in you, disclosing your trans identity to the border patrols and essentially giving them a reason to deny entry or to deport you. I feel like it can be a very complicated choice for a lot of non-binary people, that the governmental bodies that sort of like put these applications in place don't explain well enough the complications and considerations of. So I always try and dedicate some amount of time in these talks to bring that up because I think it's really important that people know what they're getting into when they change their sex designation. One last thing for the birth certificate. So similar to the name change, the estimated delivery time is about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, when it comes to driver's license and photo cards, Updating the sex designation on your driver's license or photo card gives you the option again of M, F, or X, but depending on your chosen designation, your process will be different. So the driver's license changes are free for anyone with an existing license, but for those who do not drive, the photo card comes with a $35 fee. Personally, I highly recommend the photo card for non-driving trans and non-binary people, as this can serve as a very helpful ID in proving your legal name, sex designation, and address, and may alleviate any issues or pushback you encounter while changing other documents or working through bureaucratic processes in general. I add this part particularly because I think a lot of people a lot of people who don't drive won't really think about what IDs they have until situations like suddenly needing to vote. And, then in lieu of a driver's license, you have to bring, 6 different documents that are all matching with your information and your address. The photo card is a great piece of ID that just fills all of those requirements all in one. One thing I will say is to change the sex designation to an X, you can simply visit a Service Ontario. You do not require any supporting documents at all. But for binary sex designation changes, you can go to a Service Ontario and bring an original document that indicates the upstate sex designation. So for most people, this is going to be the short or long form birth certificate or a certified copy of a birth registration. If you do not have a birth certificate or registration that represents the desired sex designation, however, for many people who were not born in Canada or specifically Ontario, this is the process that they often have to follow. A letter from a licensed doctor or psychologist is one thing that you're going to need. Again, written on that doctor's letterhead, stating that the doctor has examined or treated you and they can attest to that updated designation. And then also signed physically by them and not with an e-signature. And then they also ask for a letter from you that indicates the change that you want to make, your full name, your current address, your driver's license number, if applicable, and the name and address of the doctor or psychologist who assigned the other letter. Surgery is no longer required as a condition for sex designation changes like it once was. However, if you have had surgery, you are able to present documentation from a recognized specialist instead of a letter from a doctor or psychologist. Because for a lot of people, their surgeon who provided gender affirming care may quite possibly be an easier person to acquire this letter from than their current family doctor or psychologist. But yes, please ensure that you obtain original copies of all of these documents signed in ink, as Service Ontario will not accept e-signatures or photocopies. And then when it comes to health cards, so to change your name on a health card, you must visit a Service Ontario and bring a completed change of information form, as well as an original copy of one of the following documents: a Canadian birth certificate, a Canadian change of name certificate, or a citizenship or immigration status document in that name. Sex designation, as you can see circled here, is no longer listed on health cards at all, so that's not a consideration you have to worry about for health card updates. Then when it comes to passports, so once again, there are 3 options for sex identification on passports, and depending on whether your supporting documents have the gender or sex identifier you want, the application for your process will vary. If your name or gender/sex identifier has already been changed on your proof of citizenship, you are not eligible for the Canadian passport renewal process, and you need to apply for a brand new passport. So you can do this by filling out the adult general passport application and providing the required proof of citizenship. You will not need to provide any additional documentations of your new gender or sex identifier if your proof of citizenship, such as a Canadian birth certificate or a Canadian citizenship certificate, your proof of immigration status, or your previous passport has the gender or sex identifier that you want for your new passport, or if your previous passport has the X marker. Now, if you don't have any supporting documents, so if the sex identifier has not been updated on your proof of citizenship, you will need to provide a completed sex or gender identifier update request form along with your normal passport application. Another important consideration, so once again, the government of Canada states they cannot guarantee that other countries you visit or travel through will accept the sex or gender identifier on your passport or travel document, especially in regards to the X marker, and you may still be asked to provide your sex as either male or female when traveling. This can obviously be distressing for many people, so I make sure to flag that. Now, these last two processes that I cover are ones that a lot of people forget about. Specifically the social insurance registry. So by law, you must update your SIN record when you change your name. And to do this, you will either need to submit an application online, by mail, or in person. There are several documents required for this process, which may vary greatly depending on your citizenship and residency. So for this one, I actually recommend visiting the online portal for all the requirement and submission guidelines. And then some important considerations for this one as well. So if you are updating your sex designation, you may now choose an X marker or choose not to declare your gender. Service Canada will add a note to your record with your choice. However, note that for the last, I have 4+ years now, but I think it's over 5. They've been consistently stating that their computer systems have not been upgraded to register this information. So male or female may still appear on your SIN record. And then another really important one is the Canada Revenue Agency. So again, I mean, updating with these other governmental bodies does not update the CRA or your SIN number. So it's important to get in contact with the CRA also. And with them, you're able to update your information by phone, mail, or fax. You need to provide the CRA with a letter containing the following, which is an original or certified true copy of one of the following documents: a name change certificate from a provincial or territorial vital statistics department, or a court order issued under an act on change of name. And then you also need to provide them with your old and new names, your social insurance number, and your signature. So again, part of this is that, they have your old name. So if you haven't changed the social insurance registry first, you shouldn't have pushback, but I still think it's generally best to prioritize the social insurance registry update and then do the CRA one. And then again, yeah, for submitting this application, they have wildly different addresses and phone numbers, very specific to the part of Canada or even Ontario that you're in. Like, I know that it's a different phone number and address for people in Toronto than it is for like pretty much the rest of Ontario. So again, I like point people toward the online portal for this one, because it can be so wildly different depending on where you reside. And then just some other important updates. So there are so many different things that you have to do even once you've gone through the name change process. Some places that I think are especially important to update are Elections Canada, your electricity provider, your phone provider, your internet provider, your bank, and pretty much anyone else who may possess your personal information. All of these companies and registries will have different methods of updating your information, but they generally require a valid Canadian change of name certificate. And then TG-ID and some other resources. So TG-ID is the resource that I've built, which is an online resource collecting information on how to update legal names. Everything that I've covered here today, all of that information is collected on the site. And then I also often like to point people towards Justice Trans because I think that they have a really good collection of resources on their site that are also very specific by like province and region within province. So if you're looking on accessible legal education or a lawyer, legal advice, anything to do with sort of like transphobic policy, housing discrimination, and then policing discrimination, employment inequalities. Justice Trans have like everything you're looking for on their site. They're a really great organization. And now, so briefly before I sort of wrap up, I just want to show you all the sites. So, yeah, so this is the TG-ID site. So I originally envisioned this web application shortly after I started doing this work back in 2021. I've built a couple of different versions of this over the years. This is the latest one. I have, and many times I've looked into grant funding. I've attempted to connect with several organizations on doing this work. But unfortunately, queer and trans funding or projects, funding for projects with a queer and trans focus can be quite few and far between these days. And so I've just built this version in the hopes that it can continue to grow and build and become closer and closer to my vision over time. But for the moment, I mean, I've essentially set it up so that if you want, it can remember your filters. Currently, it just allows you to filter down to only things that relate to gender marker changes or that relate to both name and gender marker changes. And then you can also currently either specify Ontario or things that just apply to anyone, all people in Canada. My hope is that, yeah, in the future, there will be more provinces and territories available, and that I'll be able to make this available in both English and French. But currently, you can see here, we've got all of the information on name changes, pretty much everything that I presented today. All of that information is here. And I list the sources at the bottom of every page, as well as directing you toward other processes that are kind of somewhat related. And then I also have a downloads page where you can find all of the documents I reference, in addition to the slideshow that I presented today. And all of the sources for everything are listed at the bottom. I've also recently started adding a changelog so that you can keep track of what is changing on the site, as well as a contact form. So if there's anything about the site that you find confusing, inaccessible, or difficult to use, if there's a process or a feature that you would like to see as a part of this application, this is a great way to get in contact with me. But my email is also listed at the bottom of every page. So if you have any questions or concerns about anything on the site, you can always feel free to contact me. And that's everything I've prepared for the presentation today. Did anyone have any questions? It's a lot of information. It's a real info dump of a presentation.
So what happens to you if you miss a step? This must happen. What happens if somebody forgets to register with the CRA? Like if you break that chain, what are the consequences?
Repeated dead naming, misgendering, and frequently them getting. I mean, I've heard all sorts of stories about the various different ways that they will antagonize you if your information is inconsistent. But this is also the thing, there's no real guide out there for the order in which to do this. None of these websites point to each other or are talking to each other. Something I talk about a lot that I found really interesting is the ways that you can think about how all of these government agencies are able to communicate your personal information to one another to their benefit, but they are never able to do so to your benefit. So if you owe taxes, you can bet that the CRA are talking to other government agencies to figure out where you are, what you're doing, where you're employed. However, if you're changing your name with one of them, they're not communicating that information to the others. So that's one of the ways that I see there to be real room for improvement at a systemic level, for better considering the actual needs of the people going through these processes. And that's part of what I'm sort of meaning when I'm saying, like, none of these processes were clearly designed with the end user in mind, with the participant, the applicant in mind. They're all just sort of meeting their own personal needs and not really communicating with one another. So yeah, long answer, I mean, all sorts of things. There's many different ways that they can antagonize you, or it could result in just further issues with applying for CRA benefits, for getting employment, for getting a credit check. There's all sorts of ways that these things can further bar you from access to other things. Yeah.
Okay, I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, please.
If you could push a button and have the Ontario government's process reflect exactly what you want by pushing that button, what would it do?
It would remove sex markers from a lot of forms of identification. So I think the real issue with the way that, like, non-binary sex markers, like X markers, the issues that I speak to in relation to X markers, I think, like, a lot of that is to do with the fact that gender in terms of your identity is actually frequently not relevant. It's frequently listed and gathered by systems that it really does not make a difference to. Like, why does the social insurance registry care what sex you are? You can still work. You're still you're a laborer regardless of what sex you are. And then the fact that they then are going to force you into a binary sex box, regardless of the fact that it's not applicable, even if you ask for them to make a note on your file to say something else. So I think, to me, it would involve a much more streamlined process for name changes. It would involve much more transparency in terms of the steps on these sort of things, for thinking about the ways that we can explain bureaucracy. And in general, I think just making all of this stuff more accessible. I mean, a big part of the reason why I've started to do this work is that prior to the start of the COVID pandemic, a lot of urban centers, at least in Ontario, had a lot of name change clinics. And there are still some today, but a lot of them either lost their funding or stopped being offered because they were reliant on being in person in sort of 2020, 2021. So I increasingly heard more and more people struggling with this bureaucracy, not being able to figure out the process and not being able to find anyone to help them either. And that's actually a lived reality for rural people that they've been going through the entire time. If you live out in the middle of nowhere and you don't have some sort of trans or queer focused community center near you, there likely is really no one kind of there to walk you through this process. I think that's the government's responsibility. I think that the thing that I've built here is in some way the government's responsibility. And it shouldn't always involve trans people stepping in and creating these things that bridge those access gaps. But it almost always does.
Yeah, I wanted to make the point that you've taken on a huge task here. To do this unfunded and to commit to maintaining it as best you can is not only is it a huge amount of work to get it launched, but it's a huge commitment.
Yeah.
And I tend to agree that it should be the government that does it.
And that's also why I think there are a lot of various, I think, technologies like this. Like, this isn't the first thing of its kind, in that I think trans people have created all sorts of resources, whether it be trying to help you find gender affirming healthcare providers, or, figuring out how to follow the processes for X, Y, or Z. Like, there are a lot of ways that I think trans people frequently see access gaps and then try and fill those with some form of technology. There's actually a book that I will recommend to a lot of people. I was just taking notes from it today for a talk that I'm doing this week, but it came out last year, called Trans Technologies by Oliver L. Hameson, which is scholarship that this author did on a variety of different trans technologies and the ways that trans people have attempted to fill these technology gaps. But one thing that you will find over and over and over again is that the funding's just not there. And so the amount of these apps that are actively deployed or haven't been sunsetted is nowhere near the amount, nowhere near the number of the ones that have been created in even the last 5 years. You can see there are several really amazing resources that people built in 2021 that no longer exist because the cost of maintaining, both to the individual, to the people, working on it, but then also just in terms of actual technology costs, can be quite significant. But I think as we're starting to see some of those costs changing, some of those costs becoming slightly more accessible, and I think also those skills training being more directed to marginalized communities. I think that's something that I've really seen change in the last 5 to 10 years. The amount of attempts to try and teach coding or other technology skills to marginalized communities, when you give people that ability, when you give them that empowerment, obviously they're going to create the things that they see a need for in their community that no one else can see. But again, I would love to live in a world where we don't even have to do it.
Right on. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think the other resource I've tried to use before was Rainbow Health Ontario.
Yeah.
Which is an organization. They provide a directory of all the doctors, the psychologists, the surgeons, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But a lot of that information hasn't been updated since 2016,
Exactly.
2017. So it's great that you have this resource, you built it.
Totally.
And then nobody updated it. And
no, and this is also the thing, a lot of this information, you will find a lot of the information on how to change your name on every single queer and trans org in this province. Every single one of them has one single webpage trying their best to summarize this info that I just did a rush summary of in 30 minutes in 2 paragraphs, right? It's never enough. So it's felt to me like every single org is trying to meet the need. We all see the need, but everyone has only really got the resources or the ability to do kind of the bare minimum. So my vision of TG-ID is as something that frees up everyone's time from having to try and meet the bare minimum. Did my computer die? No, just turn it off. If we weren't all trying to meet that that base level, where could they dedicate those resources to?
Mm-hmm.
And I also envision it eventually. Currently, it's really just information that I input myself. But I also don't want to be the authority on this. I don't think that I can be the authority. I mean, even as a trans person creating something with trans people in mind, I obviously have a better idea of how to do that than the average cis person, but I'm still a white trans woman who lives in the biggest city in the country. That is not the experience of most people. So I can still only see things to a certain level from my perspective. One thing that I've really gotten the advantage of from not only being a person who builds this site, but then also does workshops where I try and walk people through it, where people can send me emails anytime they want, asking me questions, when I answer questions after the workshops. is all of the things that people bring to me that I never would have thought of. So I also see it as like a community resource and something that can like take information from people, verify it, and ensure that it meets a certain level of quality, and then share it on the site so that like, feasibly then any person who deals with any commissioner in the province could come to me and tell me, hey, this commissioner was really great. Hey, this commissioner you should stay away from, etc. Again, that's something that would require kind of more funding for me to realistically make happen. And also, I would love to have more people involved in all stages of the design process. At the moment, I'm currently only sort of figuring out what gaps there are in the site from, as I say, like people asking me questions, people specifically telling me that things aren't there. But I would love to be able to get ahead of that, to have people involved in all aspects of the design. And again, that's something that would have come with funding, but I've made the version that I have the resources to make. So my hope is that this can continue to grow and flourish, and I have a dream of it, covering multiple provinces. But again, that's also going to involve me then connecting with people in their local communities where they're doing the work. I know people in Quebec who run name change workshops and are doing some amazing work out there. I know some folks in Saskatchewan who are doing it. Like, there's people like me all over the country trying to make this happen for people, trying to fill these access gaps. But for me to turn this thing into the vision that I really want, it would involve a huge amount of effort in connecting all of these different people and all of these different knowledge holders into something that can sort of like hold its own. Yeah. Any other questions or comments?
What was your process like in building out this web app? Like, where did the idea come from? And like, excuse me, like, what inspired you to keep going?
Just that I know so many people for whom change name has been on their to-do list for 4 years. And as someone who went through that process myself about 6 or 7 years ago, can't remember when anything happens anymore, I know how life-changing it is. Genuinely how, like, just it ends up making your entire life easier. From everything like getting ID'd at the bar or the liquor store to traveling to, getting a call from your credit card company, all of those experiences can be really upsetting and difficult and can end up resulting in conflict and trauma when I just don't think they need to. And it's simply just because the bureaucracy is at such a high level that it makes it seem impossible to people. It makes it seem like such a huge feat. So the thing that I realized from sort of like starting to do this work, as I say, because I saw kind of a need in 2021, the real joy that I've gotten is like just hearing from so many people of how I've made it seem possible for them, how I've made it seem, like a realistic thing that they can actually accomplish, as opposed to this huge process that could end up taking them forever. They don't know all of the steps involved going into it. They're just trying to make it happen. And then suddenly, before you know, it's like, yeah, you go through all of that process to submit the name change. And then guess what? You now have to change everything else. And so, yeah, my process with it was just realizing that I'm a person that can build things, that I'm a person that has this information and sees the clear need. And once I sort of realized that all of those pieces were aspects of myself, I haven't been able to stop thinking about a way to make this happen. or to create some version of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think I built the first sort of rough version idea of it back in 2022. But again, at that point, also the idea was that it was going to like be asking different questions of you about what you need, and then from that, able to give you a step-by-step process. That requires a whole lot of logic, and I would love for something like that to exist. But that has so many considerations. Because also, when it comes to like collecting data from trans people, you have to be very careful about the way that you're doing that. I don't want to accidentally create a list that someone could use, right? So, yeah, there's just like so many considerations that I've realized this is essentially the version that I have the resources to build at this time. And my hope is that having it out here, having it available, having people able to use it, having people benefit from it, and doing talks is a way that I can hopefully like make it get closer and closer to that end vision. Yeah.
Awesome.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned that the paperwork can change
Yeah.
without notice. So,
Which means that I'm constantly looking this stuff up.
okay, that was the question. Yeah, like you just have to look for it every week or whenever you remember.
Again, part of the advantage of this being a hybrid project for me. If I were just running the web app, I wouldn't have the like, you know, I did a workshop in April, so I checked all of the paperwork then. I did a workshop in May, so I checked all the paperwork then, and it's now June, and I've checked all the paperwork again. As long as I keep doing these presentations, it gives me a reason to make sure that my information is still up to date and accurate. It's also part of the reason why I've made a last updated marker in the footer an important part of the site, and why I've added a changelog. So you can clearly go and look and see what's changed. And then also listed the source links at the bottom of every single page, in the hopes that people can cross-reference things themselves. But yeah, it's like they just give you no notice. They just suddenly change something. And I've seen it happen. I mean, not that many times, but I think some of these processes have changed in some way, probably on about 3, maybe 4 different occasions since I started doing this work. So it's like, yeah, they just do it all of a sudden. And not, again, not to worry about it.
I was doing different paperwork once, and between the time that I filled out the paperwork in the morning and when I brought it to get notarized in the evening,
It changed, yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, dude, it was awful. I was so mad. So, like, yeah, I feel where you're at. So I was very curious about that part.
Yeah,
Just checking.
yeah, making sure information is up to date and accurate when you're providing information on the government is a job in and of itself.
So the forms that they give you for this, are
Yeah.
they like fillable PDFs
No.
or no? Of course.
Some of them you can't even open without Adobe Reader.
Yeah. Those ones, if you try opening them on Firefox,
Yeah.
sometimes will work.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well. But then they won't save your edits. Yeah. But then also the thing is they do not allow e-signatures anyway. So you're gonna have to print out every single one anyway, which is why I'm always like, just print out multiple copies of every single one you're gonna have to fill out and like do a practice, and then like fill out the real one.
When I was doing the immigration paperwork for my husband, they would only accept e-signatures and would not accept
Right.
like ink signatures.
But yeah, even in the height of the COVID pandemic, they were very explicit about no e-signatures, which is bonkers because if you went to your doctor, they would often. I heard so many cases of people who were like, my doctor wouldn't. Like, they just said they couldn't do it. And it's like, well, you can't file the paperwork then. You have to find a different doctor, a doctor who's willing to use a pen.
It was weird that the doctors were just like, no.
They're like, no, not worth my time.
Huh.
Because you have to be like, no, but they're not going to accept the paperwork. Like, genuinely, you have to.
The only form that I've seen like the government doing so well is the Canadian passport. When you apply new
Yeah.
or renew it, any information you type in Adobe Reader,
Yeah.
It automatically starts generating like a QR code. And then when you take it to the office, they just scan that QR code and
Oh, yeah, that's really
it
good.
brings
Done.
it up and the signature and everything.
No, yeah, that's the thing.
And every other government entity
I know.
is old school and things
Oh,
don't work.
get these guys to the government hackathon, man. Like, however they do this.
Weirdly with each other in some way.
Weirdly, the residency applications are also really pretty good. So, yeah, on the site, I'd also provide like information about like updating if you're not a citizen, like if you're a permanent resident. The permanent residency like whole system is like actually pretty good. It's all like a digital process that you like kind of follow. Again, it's like a huge amount of information and stuff, but like, yeah, when you actually go through the process, it is pretty good. It's like it's better than most of them, but it's still like all of these sites. And I mean, I think for a lot of people, whether they're trans or not, like all of these sites just like give people anxiety. Like generally, part of the reason for this is just like no one wants to read all of this.
No.
People don't mind necessarily reading this, but it's like, yeah, it is just like always too much information, always in a way that absolutely makes no sense or seems to contradict itself within the content of one web page.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I'm sure at one point they wanted to make things easier, but then someone complains, you didn't include that, you didn't say that. And then they're like, oh, now I have to include more info.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I don't think most of these processes were designed, right? They're just like, they get amended, and they get amended, and they get amended, and then no one knows why you did it like that in the first place. They're just processes that get built and built and built on.
How everything works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, what if we built things for people?
What? No, that's crazy talk. Insanity.
What if we thought about people when we designed things?
Blasphemy.
Right?
Yeah.
So what about if you have a student loan, like OSAP?
Yeah.
Would your name change?
Nope.
Flow through to that? No.
No.
You have to apply for that separate.
And it's really annoying. I can actually say personally, one of the only places that still doesn't know the name that has been my legal name for like 6 or 7 years is the student loan people. And it's because they require the original copy of my change of name certificate being mailed to them, which is never going to happen. As anyone who goes through this process, I worked way too hard to have that piece of paper. No one else is ever holding it in their hands.
No.
And they have no way to do it in person. Like they have no in-person offices.
So can you stop paying now?
No.
Ew.
Unfortunately not. Oh, a really interesting thing as well, that I don't mention at all in this is one of the different ways that also, even when you follow all of the steps, even when you do it perfectly, it can still mess you up in your life, is credit checks. So there are 2 different cases with trans people that follow processes in like both Canada and the States that I've heard of, like 2 different pathways, which is either that the like creditors, that when you get a credit check, they have your new information, but they think you're a completely new person without your prior credit history. So suddenly now you've gone through this whole process of changing all of your information, and also you have no credit history. Or, like is the case for I think the majority of people, they just always hold on to your new name. So they always hold, or your old name. So they just always know your old name, and therefore are also often revealing and disclosing your previous name to any potential creditors. Which, in an environment where, and a society already where trans people face higher levels of housing and employment discrimination, having your creditors actively know your trans status can be not ideal.
And there's no way to know if you're going to end up on one route or the other.
No.
Damn. Because then you could just like tank your credit, fuck it right
Yeah.
up. And it's like,
No, I wish.
You see your plan.
Yeah.
So, do you ever have conversations with like married women? Because they, in many cases, have gone through all this same shit.
Yeah.
And do they have to deal with, like, are there differences for somebody who's changing their name as a trans person versus a cis woman who got married?
Yeah, I think there are ways that that process is slightly more streamlined because, again, it's something that is like expected to happen. And part of that is societal patriarchy and the ways that we are assuming that women are changing their names when they are getting married by default. And so it's a process that has therefore been designed, that has been thought of. Whereas previously, well, before anyone necessarily thought of trans people legally changing their names, the process was, they have it as a process, kind of, all of this bureaucracy really exists in place to try and prevent you from running away and avoiding the law and like obscuring your past and identity. That's why the bureaucracy is in place. I think in large part. But like that's obviously not what most people are doing. So yeah, I think it is. There are similarities, but I think generally it's easier. It's also like banks make it much easier for you. Your electricity, like they're all going to understand why it's happened. You can very easily just say, I got married and changed my name. And it's very easy to get them to let you in on those processes and like how you go about fixing it. It's much, much harder when you're a trans person. Because a lot of that information isn't available. So also something that's not currently on the TG-ID side, but was part of an older version of this project was a list of a bunch of the different like TD banks, CIBC, RBC, because they all have different ways that they are asking you to like update them of this information. And it's so hard. You have to really get down into a Google hole to figure out most of those things. But that's somewhere where it's like so much easier for someone who's getting married.
It's crazy. The fact that they were able to streamline it for people getting married proves that it does not have to be such a pain in the ass.
Right. But it's genuinely just because we're like considered too small of a population, I think, to generally consider.
And there's a way that works. So and I can tell you,
Yeah.
the process for a woman getting married cannot be like this because my wife would never have changed her name.
Right.
She had to do all this.
Right.
And I think that's you really hit on it, right? Because
this deters people.
And the perception, the bureaucratic perception, well, this is a small population, so if there is a way, they should be thankful, right? Even if you have to go like this, there's a way for you to do it, so what are you worried about?
Yeah. But when in a patriarchal society, the assumption is that 50% of the population is at some point in their lives going to change their surname. That's the general assumption. And anyone not doing that is just not following the standard path of your.
Can I ask, and it's maybe a little personal,
Sure.
but I'm just curious, so once you've done this, there's 1,000 informal places where you're going to have to change your name. What kind of resistance do you face?
Give me an example of if you think of that as an informal place.
The gym.
Sure.
Yep.
Gym. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, they're all places that just will have their own way of doing things, and may not respect your request. Again, it's harder and harder then though when you have gone through all these steps.
Right.
And so you have all of the documents that it's like, well, like that's literally not my legal name. That's literally not my legal sex. To list so would be at odds with all of the documentation I had proving it. But that's also part of the reason why, like, I mean, I think a lot of, let me explain it this way. A lot of trans people are generally tackling those informal processes first, right? Because you come out, you're living as your lived identity, but you don't want to get called the wrong name every time you go to X, Y, or Z.
Right.
So now suddenly you're doing all of these stopgaps of like, there's usually a process for like telling your university to list a different name on your student ID than the one that they have in their records that's based on your legal name. But then again, now you're like introducing all of these levels of like disclosure, who has my information, what does that information say about me? When you go to the doctor, often they'll like ask like, do you have a preferred name? And it's like, that can be helpful to some degrees, but then also it's kind of outing you as trans to whoever you're talking to, because now suddenly you have like your name and your name as they like are, considering it. Because the name that you go by in your day-to-day life is not necessarily considered to be the real one out of those two pieces of information. The real one to most authorities is the one that's on your ID. So this is part of why, again, I advocate so strongly. And it's not because I think that we should all, follow the government systems and like give the government all of the information about your life and how you live your life. I don't necessarily think that that's the solution. But in a society where so many places are constantly asking for you to prove who you are and have some sort of proof of your name, having to go through every single day with your information on your ID, with your legal identity being at odds with your social identity, causes endless amounts of strife. And so I just think if we can get as many trans people through this process as possible, it reduces what is already a difficult existence, or it reduces the difficulty of an already difficult existence.
Right on.
It makes your day-to-day life less stressful. The mail you're receiving has your name on it. At the bank, they're calling you by your right name. You have your correct name on your debit card. As I say, when you go and get ID to the liquor store, they're not suddenly like, oh, well, this isn't you. Like having updated IDs is just makes existing just like that much less stressful.
So you have a background in hospitality as well, because you worked at a restaurant. So how does it work, like from a smart serve perspective? If somebody hasn't yet updated their ID and you're not positive if they're the person in the ID or not.
Yeah, it could just get barred, not taken as who you are. Yeah, I mean, this is also an issue. This is an issue in a variety of degrees. Facial recognition systems is also a great example of the way that this can affect people, right? I was writing earlier today, as I mentioned, I'm preparing for this talk that I'm doing on Tuesday, which is going to be about trans technologies, designing systems for trans people, collecting data with trans people in mind. A great example of a pitfall in that is Uber. So Uber were trying to make riders more confident in the identities of their drivers. And so a way that Uber thought to do this was to get potential drivers to upload a photo of their face and try and match it with a photo on their ID. And a lot of facial recognition systems are willing to consider things like glasses or facial hair changing over time and like allow for those discrepancies. But generally, the assumption there is that people's faces don't change, which is just not true when you think about trans people. Any trans person who's been on hormones for a period of time looks very different than they did when they started. And there are also facial surgeries that a lot of trans women go through. And so that immediately means that you get flagged as, fraudulent, as like not matching your ID. And then that's also a way that, yeah, like if you are going to a bar and you're like, well, this is my ID, and it's like, well, it doesn't look like you. It has a man's name, whatever. That could suddenly just be now you just don't get to hang out with your friends. You just don't get to do anything.
So is like the bouncer or the bartender the bad guy in that situation?
Like I don't really think, like, I understand from their perspective, like the thing that they're trying to do is in the right? Like it's not like anyone other than the government is in the wrong there. It's just that these systems, once again, are not designed with trans people in mind. There are things that we are willing to, discrepancies that we're allowing for in the way that people move through the world, based on an assumption that, cis people are the only people. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. Yeah. No, I understand the whole thing. I'm just very curious about the actual day to day and how folks handle that.
It just ends up meaning that, yeah, I mean, it just ends up causing stress and distress in terms of like being able to live your life on a day-to-day basis. And this is the thing about this work. This is why I find this work so important, because there are already so many things holding trans people back. The last thing that we need is also to like not feel like we can like go out and do stuff and like be in spaces, and particularly when like living a trans life, I think very often involves having trans community, knowing other trans people, like sharing our stories and experiences, being able to understand, well, what's worked for you, like what's going to work for me, because no one's putting out guides out there, right, in terms of how to do stuff. You have to be in community with people, and you have to talk to people, and like learn through osmosis in that way. But again, if it's like difficult for you to be outside, it's difficult for you to exist, then you just can't. Yeah, this is the thing about the way that societal transphobia exists, is that it's like it just kind of holds you down in all of these different aspects of your life, in ways that all just end up building up into just like everything being stressful. Yeah. No, and I mean there's all sorts of ways as well that like ID discrepancies like are one of many factors in the reasons why trans people face higher levels of housing discrimination, employment discrimination. Our unemployment rate is about 5 times the average population. Finding stable housing as a trans person, also incredibly difficult. Like, all of those things are held back by just all. And so it's like, if we can make these bureaucratic processes easier, if we can demystify them, if we can like help walk people through them, yeah, I mean, having accurate IDs is I am not over exaggerating when I say life changing. Yeah, because it allows you to just be in a lot of places that you wouldn't get to otherwise. Yeah.
I have another quick question.
Please.
When we look at the financial barrier and the financial cost of this, what does that tend to range? Because I know sometimes there are documents that are not necessarily needed. Yeah. So like, what does that range look like for somebody who might need everything and somebody who might need the bare minimum?
Great question. Yeah, so the name change is the most costly thing. The name change is generally the financial barrier that I see people experience.
157, right?
It's like 157.
Plus HST.
Yeah, and then you're also you're adding commissioning costs onto that if you can't find someone that will do it for free. So it's gonna be like $35 to $40.
Okay.
If you don't have access to your birth certificate, you're gonna be paying for a copy of that as well. It's like an extra sort of like something in that range, sort of the $30 to $40 range.
So like at 250-ish roughly.
Yeah. Say you're not a driver and you have to get a photo card. As per my recommendation, I think it makes everything a lot easier. That's another $35.
Direct shipping's expensive.
Direct shipping is expensive.
Yeah.
But again, like it like reduces that stress. Like I know someone who submitted her forms like 10 weeks ago. Hasn't heard anything. She like called for an update the other day and they were like, call back next week. We'll tell you. It's really, and especially because you're sending out all copies of your birth certificate. You don't have your birth certificate while your name's being changed. You don't have any birth certificate. You don't get to have one. And they just hold on to it. And then this is also the thing. When I was going through this process myself originally, back like, 2018, 2019, I remember the first time I went to an ID clinic that was being run by one of the like arts community centers in Toronto. And I met two people who it was their third or fourth time there because they had submitted all of their paperwork and been denied again and again and again because they were missing some piece of information. It was something they didn't know. They didn't have a copy of their birth certificate because they don't know their parents. And this was an organization that was willing to like help try and cover the cost of the fees for people that show up. And if you're like one of the first 10 people that show up to that workshop or whatever. So then again, it's like, I don't know, you missed the bus and like, bad luck to you. Try again in 3 months.
So they don't refund it if they deny your application?
No, they charge you.
So that 157, if you miss one piece, could be charged again and again and again.
Potentially, yeah.
So like
There,
200 to $1,000.
I think if they send, I think often if there's like a minor discrepancy and they send it back, they will just consider it all one process. But yeah, I mean, if there's like any delay in getting it back to them after they send it back, and then you're still paying for another potentially tracked envelope, Yeah, like the costs can really get up there, and it can be really prohibitive for people as well. That's why I'm really thankful. One thing that a lot of these orgs that try and offer name change clinics and things can do that I can't do is provide those sort of honorariums and fees. The last workshop I did last month with LGBT Youth Line was really great because they were able to provide like 16 different honorariums to cover the full 157. But again, I mean, they're still not covering like shipping fees.
Birth certificate.
Yeah, things like that.
Commission.
But they were at least giving 157 out to people. Yeah, no, the cost can be really, really prohibitive for a lot of people.
Yeah. Especially in a population that already sees a huge employment and pay gap. Like
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different barriers to consider. I think that's part of the reason why also I just haven't given up on this, right? Like, it's like if I see a way that I can help make this easier for people, like it is hard for me to not do everything in my power. So just trying to make that happen.
Absolutely. Was there something that happened that made this change from an idea into I actually need to do this? Was there like something you experienced, something you saw on TV? Like what was that catalyst?
No, just the more people that I talked to about this. Just the more people who've told me that this work is needed, and the emails that I've gotten from people for whom my work has totally changed this for them. Ultimately, that's the reason that I do this. because it just, I don't know, having someone who is friendly and willing to talk and like explain it to them and like try and walk people through it in as, you know, least jargony terms as I can manage, has completely changed the whole situation for several people.
Mhm.
Yeah. So for me, it's really been the more people I help, the more I realize that I need to still be helping people. But again, my hope is that, you know, if I can continue to push for this, if other people can continue to push for this, if we could turn this into something that is bigger, wider reaching, you know, I don't necessarily think that something like this is a solution or is a, you know, is a fix in any way. I think it's a tool that allows us to bridge that access gap, as I like to say. And I believe that something like that can then push systemic and wide societal change. That we could see the government recognizing the need to simplify these processes with the more work that people like I do to like make it available. It's the hope anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know what else can I help for. Yeah.
Really awesome presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Learned a ton, and obviously this is a huge passion project for you and something that you know have done all your homework on. It's really, really good stuff. Really glad I got to see it.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I learn more about how to walk people through this genuinely pretty much every time I do one,
Mm-hmm.
because someone ends up having a question that I haven't thought of before. Yeah. But yeah, I would really recommend this book if anyone's curious in the work that other trans people have done to build technologies. Oh, I could also show you, I have a friend out in the States who has been working on a project that is kind of similar. We've connected in some ways. Hers is open source. She's working on trying to make it. Do we have it? I don't remember what the URL she's using for it is. I can look at the GitHub. Yeah, so they've been working on this for a while. They originally had funding, but funding has kind of come and go. So it's still not out, which is again part of the reason why I stopped waiting for funding.
Right.
Because of my attempts to work with Namesake and realize that, you know, trying to do the full vision from the start would result in just too much of a delay.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that if I could get an MVP out, if I could get just like anything out there that can start to help people, that's actually something that can help me push for more and more funding.
For sure. It's a great tool to take on the road with you and do all this, right?
But the way that my friend Eva has been trying to build this is way closer to what I would really love to see. It's like it's a full app that she like is having all sorts of people contribute on that helps you do everything from like you can fill out the applications on the site, and then it will like provide you with a filled PDF to then like take out and sign. It's like walking you through every single aspect of everything.
This process should be better, so we're gonna make the tool that makes it better for people.
Yeah.
Huge lift. But
so
fantastic if you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like I would love for TG-ID to get closer and closer to what Eva is doing here. But again, I just, for me, felt the need that I needed something online,
Mhm.
and that could actually be the way that I can get some more eyeballs on it
Yeah.
and get some more attention to it. Because yeah, I mean, she was trying to get this up before the election, and we're now 7 months later, and it's still not online.
Right.
So, I mean, building an app is really hard. Yeah. So that's why also like currently the site is just like a really basic HTML jQuery site that I've just like written to be as like low issue as possible. Like it just like is a relatively small application. I can host it for pretty much free.
Yeah.
Like it's like really not taking much. But I see it growing into something that has more and more needs and more technical requirements to it. But again, that requires then more infrastructure than just me to just be
Right.
updating it.
Right.
Love
Yeah.
the design though, like the color scheme.
Oh,
and
I
the
know.
background. It
Yeah.
sounds so good.
I know. Yeah. I really love it. I mean, she's a fantastic designer. I really like Eva.
I mean, yours too, but
Thank
snails.
you.
Come on.
It's because snails can change their
That's
sex.
the
Right. Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
At first, I was like,
Oh.
"Oh no, the projector's dirty."
I
but
thought
then-
it was because it was slow. I thought the process was
Snail mail?
slow, so that's why we have
It's like snail.
snails.
No,
Yeah.
it's because snails can actually change their sex.
Huh.
It's
I was
a real
like,
process.
You gotta have the spirals going in the right direction to be able to mate too, though.
But yeah, this is Eva, who's a friend of mine
Okay.
who's been working on that project. So yeah.
Very cool.
So yeah, that's what I mean. Like, there's so many of us who all are seeing similar needs and wanting to make similar things happen, and it's like, yeah, just really difficult to actually make that happen. Another person who I am friends with is Celeste Rhiannon, who does a lot of work out in Quebec on the same thing. She doesn't have a site, but she does a lot of stuff on just anti-trans legislation, particularly in Quebec, and also nationally in Canada. And then, yeah, she does a lot of like running trans ID clinics out in Quebec, particularly in rural communities. She's done a lot of work on making this more accessible outside of like Montreal and Quebec City.
That's great.
So yeah, I don't know. There's just like so many of us who all want to see better for our community, and we're all trying to figure out the way to get there on our own. And I increasingly think that the biggest barrier is funding.
Mhm.
The biggest barrier is just like, yeah, there were realistically, places providing more funding to particularly trans people who are trying to design things for trans people. We could see way more resources that actually can live online for an extended period of time,
Right.
and be maintained. Which again, I truly believe could push to wider societal change.
Right. Because if you can detach from like the cycles of government money ebbing and flowing, and even perhaps like I don't know as much about that, but even perhaps like the ebbing and flowing of private money. But for sure, government money has trends and fads, and like anybody who has to get funding knows about this. It's
Yeah.
If you can create a stable source of resources for people that's not tied to government grants, it's way better. That's a huge lift.
But then there's also like, I don't know, a lot of considerations to be had about like capitalist funding, about funding coming from private organizations, because they can also change their tune.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think a great example of that is the way that Meta as an organization like really pushed for trans inclusion on their platforms for many years. They've done a complete U-turn on that.
Yeah.
But even, I mean, a lot of the work that they even tried to do like wasn't enough. I think I read recently, back in like 2014, Facebook added like 50 different potential genders that you could select. But their algorithm was still binary. Was it still a binary sex model? It was still classifying you as one of two genders. It's letting you say what you want to say. Doesn't actually mean anything to their backend.
That's interesting.
But then even that is like kind of a thing of the past. Because it has become more financially viable for them as a company
Right.
to not serve a small community, but to rather serve the wider population that don't necessarily agree with that community anymore. So yeah, I think there's also just like a lot of really finicky little considerations in terms of who to take money from, both privately and publicly.
Yeah.
It just gets further and further complicated when you're dealing with marginalized communities as your users, and also when you're then trying to design and develop within that community also. Yeah. Anyway, I could go on about this all day, but thank you all for listening.
This is great.
Yeah.
No, awesome.
Thank you very much.